Welcome to Cut to the Chase, where we talk about compelling legal, regulatory, and public interest information and news. Your host is Gregg Goldfarb, an attorney, entrepreneur, investor, and activist.
All right, folks, it is time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I brought on two guests, Ed Lake and John Ray, to help discuss what a lot of us are starting to read in the newspapers and get a little bit concerned, which is these forever chemicals, also referred to as PFAS. Ed, John, how are you doing today?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
I'm great.
All right, so Ed Lake is like, historical, famous mass tort guy. I really don't need to do too much in the way of introduction. He's on the top of that food chain. John Ray works with Ed, and John actually has an interesting background, not a lawyer, but he might as well be one. Started a pharmaceutical company in his 20s, sold it, then moved out to FDA regulatory consulting, teaching mass torts to lawyers, telling them what makes a good case or not. I hope I got that pretty accurate, John. Did I get that good?
Close enough.
Close enough. All right. If there's anything you want to amend, feel free to do so at any time. All right. So right now, we want to focus on the water consumption. There are two different types of cases out there. Well, not really. There's going to be a lot of different types of cases. Firefighters, so a lot of people are hearing AFFF. And now, water consumption. So this episode is going to be about water consumption, but also just to basically explain what these forever chemicals are, where are they, how did they get there, what kind of injuries they cause, and all that. So let's do a little bit of that, John. Why don't you start it off and just kind of explain what a forever chemical is and what the PFA is. Let's go who, what, where, when, why.
One thing, all PFAS chemicals, and there's like 18,000 different versions have been developed over the past 50 years. They all have in common is a bonded fluorine and carbon, at least one carbon bonded to one fluorine. These two substances don't normally bond in nature. They have to be forced to bond through two different processes we don't need to get into. The thing that makes these substances so useful is also the very thing that makes them so dangerous to humans and the environment. They're impossible to break down. That's why they're called forever chemicals. When they get into the water supply, which they're in 98% of us have PFAS in our bloodstream at the levels necessary to cause cancer. A study that's been going on since 2011, NAINS, part of the CDC, has confirmed that year after year. How did it get into our blood? Well, many ways, some occupational, like firefighting and working in a facility that makes chlorine, but most of it is from the water contamination that's being found as the testing is going on, probably going to be in the majority, if not all of the water in the country. We're being exposed to the water coming through our taps. The way this happens is a facility or a group of facilities on a river. 75% of the country gets its water ultimately from a river through a water treatment plant. The facility, the industries, they contaminate water. The water treatment plant takes the water, they treat it like they would to take out contaminants, but nothing they do takes out the PFAS. So it comes straight to you through your tap. Even if you don't drink your water, you bathe in it, you make coffee with it, you bathe in it, you are exposed to the water in your home. So that's where the majority of the injury cases will come from, people being exposed to water in their home. Even sometimes you may find that a person worked at the mill that contaminated the river, but that mill also contaminated their river at home. So you might have the choice of bringing it as an occupational exposure case and facing workers' comp exclusivity or not. The multitude of ways these substances are used by industry and their very usefulness is what has made them so prolific. There have been litigations many times where a substance has contaminated a water supply or air, but they're usually very regionalized. They can be a spill of some kind and so forth. The only difference here in this is that this is the first substance that's ever been able to contaminate essentially the entire country and everybody in it. So we're looking at a litigation that it looks like one massive litigation, but it's really a mass of mass litigations. And so I've been working for 2 years. Basically, I figured how can this be done? from a practical standpoint, when there will be millions and millions, by my estimates, there'll probably be 9 million cancer cases alone, and that'll only make up 8% of all the cases. That doesn't include private well cases for remediation and so forth. The insurance industry has their actuarials have determined that part of the settlement liability insurance will cover is $1 trillion, trillion with a T. We've never seen that before. I mean, tobacco is the only thing that even came in the world of that. It's going to require teams of lawyers. It's going to require lawyers working together. That's why we formed a consortium of firms to go after certain, what I call case clusters in the country. Very few of these cases will be in MDL because we're not going to have diversity of jurisdiction. Because when you're suing the people that actually contaminated the water, most of those are going to be in the same state, and some are going to be domiciled in the state. So you're not going to have total diversity. We may see one more MDL for military cases because their exposure is incident to military service. But outside of that, most of these cases are going to proceed to state court, and hopefully a lot of them will be in the 17 states that have state MDLs. Like California, Texas, 67% of the population of the country lives in those states.
All right, so that's a lot of information, and some of it was pretty startling. 98%, I've seen 99% of the US population has these forever chemicals in their blood.
At levels required to cause cancer.
All right, so let's dummy this down a little bit. I hate to use the word dummy, but how do we know that 98, 99% of us have these things in us and at that level?
CDC.
I haven't been, no one's tested me for that.
The CDC has a division called NAMES, National Health Nutritional Study. They do all types of studies. And since 2011, they've been doing a biannual study, getting large groups of people from around the country and testing their blood. And so the statistical analysis from those studies has concluded that between 98 and 99% of it have it in our blood. Year after year after year, the studies have concluded the same thing. Recently, the levels in the general population have went down a little, but they're still far higher than necessary to cause cancer.
All right, so let's talk about, before we get into the who, I want to really still focus on the what here. And what, forever chemicals, this bonded chemical arrangement, I'm not really sure I fully grasp that concept, but where are these, products? Which products have these chemicals?
Well, if you look around the room you're in right now, you'll see a lot of examples, but it's really probably not the things in your home that cause the problem. It's the way industry uses them, and because they're so useful, like paper mills, electroplating facilities, and all the metal in your house is electroplated. They mix these chemicals with other chemicals and with water. And the other chemicals break down. They make a batch of processing chemical, whatever it is, processing fluid, whatever it is they're doing. And they put PFAS in it, either as a defoaming agent, a surfactant, or whatever reason that particular type of operation uses it. Then the other chemicals break down, so the batch becomes no good anymore. It's not useful anymore. The PFAS chemicals are completely intact. They then send the batch, the spoiled batch, to their water treatment process. Sometimes you'll see that outside a facility. In more modern facilities, it's inside a facility. And they basically purify the water, except nothing they're doing takes the PFAS out. It destroys the other chemicals that can be destroyed. It doesn't take the PFAS out. And then they discharge that water directly into a river or into even public water system. And then downstream from wherever that is, another water provider takes that water out, cleans it again, but it doesn't take the PFAS out, and delivers it to people's homes.
All right. So
why don't you give an example though? You said you don't want to know the who yet, but that's really what you're asking. Who are the defendants here, right?
yeah,
So,
I'm gonna get to that. I first want to talk about, what this thing is and how it's
well, no, but
So much
we're talking about hundreds of thousands of companies that might have liability.
yeah. And
Not hundreds or thousands, hundreds of thousands.
all right. So Ed, you actually created a white paper?
Actually, John did this.
John, okay.
Yeah, I just joined recently.
So that's PFAS litigation in a box. What is PFAS in a box? And your first line, it says that settlements in future PFAS litigation are likely to exceed $1 trillion. This is the first time in history that major insurance companies are taking write-offs for litigation that has not even yet occurred. And so, I mean, this sounds like a problem bigger than tobacco. And you
Put
know,
it this way, there's an article that I was sent about a defense counsel at some type of manufacturing conference, basically saying that this is going to be bigger than asbestos, tobacco, and MBTE. I don't know if you guys know what that was. All put together. And the reason is, we're talking about 9 million potential cancer cases, 9 million. And for every one cancer case, there's probably 8 to 9 other potential disease cases. Now, it doesn't mean they're all compensable, and obviously everybody's not going to bring a claim. But if you start doing the numbers of 350 million people in this country, if everybody's got it in their blood, just a matter of what's the percentage of clients that are sick are willing to sign it. So it's about 9% have cancers. I mean, it's just astronomical. So John put together over 20 firms, and that's probably not enough to go after everybody. He'll tell you that the first claim that the consortium is going to bring is over 1,000 defendants, correct, John?
It started out at 14,000. I whittled it down to 1,400, the best ones, and the ones that discharged the most, and also the most financially viable. But
and a good part about that is it doesn't put anybody out of business.
Yeah, that cluster involves 10 million people exposed to water from the same river, and it's in a state that has state MDL, so it makes it possible to, you know, to do something that big. This isn't just the adage is how to eat an elephant one bite at a time. This isn't just an elephant; it's a herd of elephants.
all right, so let's talk about the defendants who, you know, the companies that have manufactured and distributed these products.
Not just them, it's as crazy as Amazon. They're using it in their boxes when they ship. It's as possible as a paper manufacturer or someone who makes book. I mean, the range of defendants is anybody who uses one of these 18,000 different varieties of PFAS, and it got either into a river, a stream, a reservoir, or maybe even seeped through the land. Now, if you've seen that movie, was it Dark Waters? That was C8, which is also a type of PFAS. You had injury cases and you had a remediation case. So that's what's going to happen all over the country. Some of these are becoming Superfund sites, which switches the liability also to the landowner. So we're going to have this litigation is probably going to last 10, 20, 30 years, especially because of the latency period in cancer in general. These products are still being used, although what is it, the FDA? The EPA,
Yeah.
the EPA has mandated some of the PFAS be stopped being used. There may be 3 or 4. There's still thousands still being used. And the larger users, such as 3M, who settled the case for up to $12 billion for public water facilities, and that was just one manufacturer. BFAS just settled one last week for
Just so you know,
$300.
the AFF, the firefighting foam defendants, are minor defendants in this litigation. When we get into the water cases for not the people who made the products, but the people who discharged them into the water, where it's companies like Northrop Grumman, Microsoft, Apple, Mohawk Paper, Mohawk Carpets, Inland Paper, Georgia Pacific Paper. It's just a whole list of 156 SIC codes that the EPA has identified as ubiquitously used in these products. You would think these companies have stopped, but they have not. They're telling their stockholders, we will phase out PFAS when we find a better alternative. What they're hoping is somebody finds a way to break it down. The reality is that one company in the paper business cannot stop using it while everyone else is still using it, because if they did, they would no longer be cost competitive. So they're going, even though they know they're going to get sued, they're still using it. They're still renewing their MPDS permits. The discharges since 2019, since the EPA has been tracking it specifically, actually went significantly up by 2023, not down.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about just enable the audience to kind of focus in a way where they can kind of figure out whether this is something they should even look into, as a, potentially hiring a law firm or not. And I think the easiest way for the audience to do that is, let's talk about the actual injuries and diseases that we are pretty sure these forever chemicals can cause.
Well, in the C8 litigation, the original, the one that the Dark Waters movie about, the defendants and the plaintiffs agreed for the defendants to fund the science panel. Now, we were looking at a population of only like 67,000 people there exposed to the Washington Works plant PFAS discharge. And what they concluded, what that scientific outside experts from that small population, that it causes kidney cancer and testicular cancer. Now, these are endocrine disrupting chemicals. We know they cause more cancers, and the Fed is funding a lot of studies right now. We will eventually be able to prove pretty much any hormone sensitive cancer, but right now the ones that we could definitely prove are testicular and kidney. Then thyroid disease, which would be everything from Hashimoto's disease to hyperthyroidism, hypothyroidism, those different diseases. Preeclampsia in pregnant women, a certain other autoimmune condition. They also decrease vaccine response. I don't know that you're going to see a lot of cases come out of that. After COVID, maybe, I don't know. Now, what we're going to see going forward is that there will be studies that prove that these endocrine disrupting chemicals cause the same cancer that all endocrine disrupting chemicals cause, but we ultimately have to have those studies to litigate, to get past the causation of there in a case. There's the C8 Science Panel. If you just Google C8 Science Panel, you'll find the website, and it has all the studies for what was discussed, proven in the C8 litigation. Robert Millett did that. I mean, he was a young lawyer, and it was much more difficult. What he did then was very difficult. I won't say the litigation is easy now, but it's far less complex, and we've got government agencies doing a lot of the evidentiary work for us. So.
All right, so going back to the whole concept of me trying to get the audience, like figuring out, hey, all right, I've got testicular cancer. My doctor says nobody my age gets testicular cancer. I'm sitting here drinking water. Everybody's drinking water. How do I know that the water is contaminated? Why should I get involved in litigation if I can't even figure out, I had bottled water this morning. I had tap water in the afternoon. I was out, I flew out to Michigan and had their water. How do I know that whatever water that I'm drinking is causing whatever cancer I might have?
But it's not just about drinking the water. And the defendants in the C8 litigation tried to go down the road of saying, you need to prove you drank your water. Some people drink bottled water, and the judge in that litigation said he didn't want to hear it. People bathe in the water, they cook with their water, they make coffee with their water. Water comes into your house, you're exposed to it. You need to be exposed for years. So that's basically the baseline. So if so what you're on vacation somewhere else for a week, that really doesn't change the analysis. And as far as knowing whether your water is contaminated or not, the United States Geological Survey, USGC, is the primary federal agency testing water, and there's a map. You can go and put in your zip code, or but a lot of states are also testing. So you can also call your own water department, and they will and ask questions. Water departments up until last year they didn't want to say that their water was contaminated. So, there were ways that they could get around the requirements of the Federal Right to Know Act. Now, because they're filing cases for remediation, they're more forthcoming with the fact that, yes, our water had allergens. You know, we tested over the last year, and every time it had allergens. PFAS. Something.
Let me interrupt 1 second. So if 3M settled a water case, a remediation case. Now, certainly that's going to be tougher on, I guess, for causation, you know, direct causation, but it's like any other mass tort. If the studies are there and you have that particular criteria, then you're probably going to be compensable. Going back to AFFF, which is one type of PFAS, what the attorneys for a lot of the plaintiffs have agreed to is that rather than litigating some of the injuries that are questionable at this time, they're going to table it. That is, there's a tolling agreement for the next 4 years where they will see what the studies say. And based upon what happens over the next 4 years, we'll determine which injuries may be compensable and which injuries won't be, right? So let's say there were, you know, when this thing started, there were about 30 different injuries that we were going after. Then, you know, there was tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, and everybody made up there, whatever. So now it looks like there's one tier that they're gonna pay on, and then there's everything else that they're just going to wait on. So they're going to be dismissed without prejudice and wait for the studies. Now, one of the reasons is, and John will tell, and he told me this, there's something like 30,000 different studies going on right now with regard to PFAS and you know what injuries it might be causing. Is that correct, John?
It's 3,600. There were 2 years ago. There were clinical studies. There were 300 going on. Then the federal government, I think it's $9 billion in grants they put up for the studies. So now there are 3,600 ongoing on PubMed. You find
so we expect the litigation, like a lot of litigations, to mature over time, where there will be more injuries that are compensable.
All right, and this is unlike
state.
other.
I'm sorry.
No, go.
Those are state cases. So in those where there's no state MDL, that consolidated action, these are all going to be pretty much individual cases. It's almost like a car accident.
Yeah. All right. So there's a lot of moving parts here. Unlike a lot of litigation, this is not, you know, a handful of defendants, one earplug, and, you know, a bunch of people that were damaged by that and trying to prove that. There's different layers of litigation that we've already referred to here. So I want to kind of straighten that out so that we can focus in on your white paper on,
Okay.
you know, basically putting aside, all right, we mentioned the 10, 11, $12 billion settlement that 3M entered into with water providers. And that is a bunch of states, local governments sued them because they know what's going on. They know their water is contaminated and they're sending it to us and we're drinking it. So that case just concerns cleanup, right?
Correct.
This money that the 3M and who else settled that? Was that DuPont also involved in that?
3M.
And BASF has kicked in, and a couple of the other defendants have kicked in a smaller amount.
Yeah, BSAF just agreed to 365
million
last week.
Yeah. Okay.
But so there's not just one. See, that's the thing. There are multiple defendants, which to me, yes, does it take longer usually? Yes. But to me, especially in a mass tort like this, the more defendants, the better. Because number one, as I said before, you worry less about putting one out of business, bankruptcy court, than one company feeling it's all on their shoulders and how to do crazy stuff like, you know, Johnson & Johnson's done with talc, right? Or what they tried to do with the Supreme Court at Roundup. Here, to me, you know what, everybody chips in a little bit. If you're having 1,400 different defendants to pay out $1 million, people could hopefully finally, and I'm hoping that people will really get what they're entitled to, even though it's a mass tort. So when it's usually they only getting pennies on the dollar, you know?
Yeah. No, I know I don't want to say, I'm admitting that, but I hear you. So let's just, on the water providers, can other states and local governments still sue, or is that?
Yes. And in fact, there's a lot of private wells that have been poisoned too, right? So you might have somebody who, in a lot of states, John could talk more to this, you have private well companies, right? Now that they haven't brought any kind of lawsuits yet that I'm aware of. Or it could be a simple landowner, right?
Yeah.
Who has a well, or his land got poisoned. So you have these remediation cases.
Yeah. So, okay, look, that's the second. So you've got the water providers, suing to get their water clean that we drink and all that.
Same with the private providers. It's just a smaller case.
Okay. The other type of case that you just referred to, Ed, is the property damage. So somebody's property has been damaged by this. And I think you mentioned the Falling Waters movie, which actually Netflix this month put it on their list of movies. So if anybody's kind of interested, that is sort of an interesting, sort of factual, with a little bit of embellishment here and there, story about PFAS and when it was uncovered and what it was doing to animals on a farm, right?
But that was particularly, I think, Teflon, right? Is that what that was?
But that was like a property damage claim.
Yeah. And well, it's a remediation, it's a cleanup claim. But he had both actually. And that he got also, if I remember, the landlord got sick, and he also settled for cancer cases. Remember, so he had both. There were claims. They didn't really get into that in the movie, but I'm sure there was both claims. John probably could talk to more of that.
Okay.
I think part of the reason that the AFFF defendants settled the remediation cases is CERCLA designation for PFAS chemicals was finalized in May, entered the Federal Register, which means it goes into effect, I think, July 3rd. And although injury cases don't arise in CERCLA, both the public remediation cases as well as private remediation cases do. And the standards of evidence are so changed in the plaintiff's favor that it was wise for them to do that.
All right. And a lot of people have been hearing the AFFF, and that's the firefighters. So these forever chemicals were used in firefighting foam. The firefighters are spraying it, it's going on them, it's going in the aquifer. That's not the essence of your white paper, but I think there's some issue that pertains a little bit to the audience, which was, and I think you did touch on it, what the judge and the parties essentially came to an agreement on what injuries right now fall within the AFFF litigation. And that's basically the state of the science. Is that accurate in terms of what injuries are still in play there? And
I guess rather than having 20 different trials for 20 different injuries, or bringing motions for summary judgment to get rid of certain injuries and making this fight now, they have agreed to table the fight for a while to see what the science comes out.
I think a part of it was because, there are probably some other liver cancer, thyroid cancer that we probably could prove now, plans to probably prove now. There's a lot of research going on. So instead of having, going through Daubert and having proven neural causation right now and possibly failing, it may wait on the science, because the science is forthcoming and it's going to be thumbs up and thumbs down on each one.
Right.
Yeah. But some of the injuries and the AFFF multi-district litigation are going forward.
Yes.
And those would be the endocrine disrupting type of injuries.
All the C8, they went with the C8 injuries, the ones that were proven by the C8 panel, the ones I discussed earlier. And the ones that are currently under research, and some of the research is concluded, and it's positive for those related people. I mean, firefighting foam is PFAS. It's just one of the versions.
Yeah.
Now, the one difference with foam, there is an alternate non-PFAS chemical for foam.
Yeah. All right. So I just want, last week or 2 weeks ago, the New York Times, just if people really don't believe me and believe us, when we're talking about $1 trillion litigation and something that's going to be going on for a long time and that's going to affect a lot of us. The New York Times actually wrote an article last week, lawyers to plastic makers prepare for astronomical PFAS lawsuits. And apparently, I guess they got one of the lawyers, Brian Gross, at a conference in front of a bunch of the big plastic corporate people. And he basically said, that it's emerged as one of the major pollution issues of the time, and that the plastic industry executives need to prepare for a wave of lawsuits with potentially astronomical costs. Okay, well,
And that's only one industry, right? I mean, almost every major industry, from, like I said, cardboard to plastic spoons. I mean, if you think about it, if they use PFAS on a plastic spoon, you don't have to drink the water either. Every time you use that spoon
yeah,
and you're licking it, it might be getting into your bloodstream. So it's almost, if you think about it, so many different defendants that normally you say, "Oh, they're all going to point their fingers," right? But I
yeah.
think here we have the advantages I keep going back to, that everybody can contribute. Clients can get a fair amount without these companies having to go bust.
Yeah.
And if that's true, it'll be the first time that I think in a long time that that's happened.
All right. Well, we want, I don't know what we want, but here's another product that surprisingly has, I when I was researching to prepare for this show today or whatever, apparently Post-its, Scotchgard, everybody knows Scotchgard, Teflon. I mean, think about it. These are products that you're like, hey, they're never, they're going to be good.
Everything that's used to either make something stain-proof or waterproof probably has PFAS in it. Correct, John?
Yeah, and what you just held up involved multiple processes involving PFAS. The adhesive on the back of each one of those came from a separate factory. PFAS is used in the manufacture of adhesive extensively. That paper started as trees, or possibly recycled paper, and went through a process at a mill that PFAS was used at every stage of that process. Then it went out to a cutting facility, whether it was coated in PFAS, that slickness that it has, and dyed, and whoever made the dye also used PFAS in making the dye.
What's interesting about a lot of these mass torts, I've been sort of a new guy in this industry, is, when I first got in there, I thought, they'd always be fighting about, nothing's wrong with the product that we don't know. How did we know? Whatever. But it seems like every one of these major litigations, they always knew. The manufacturer knew about the problems and just hid the information. And apparently there was a ProPublica article that was published about one of 3M's scientists who uncovered the fact that it was in her blood, the forever chemicals, and they shut her down. They shut her research down or whatever and made her life miserable. And I guess it seems like this has been known, the PFAS entering our blood and all that for decades. So I guess I don't feel too bad for 3M and the other 500,000 potential defendants.
Unfortunately, that's usually true, that when you look at the emails, okay, when you look at the marketing and you decide, and then you see the emails comparing those who know the science versus those who are involved in the sales, it's usually pretty obvious.
But strictly from a litigating standpoint, with hazardous substances, facilities, industries that use that, businesses that use hazardous substances are charged with the knowledge of the harm those substances. We don't have to prove they actually do, but we can.
And in fact, now a recent regulation requires anyone who's going to use more than 1 pound of PFAS that could get into the water has to report it. And that means in order to get a permit to do it, it's now lowered to a pound when it used to be a ton, right, John?
It was 2,500 pounds reduced in 2022 to 100 pounds. It's called the reportable quantity. Today, if a facility releases more than 1 pound in a day, which they do, not only do they have to report it to emergency response, EPA emergency response, they have to run an ad in all papers necessary to inform all possibly affected persons. So that's CERCLA, I think that's 111F.
Now, there might be some people out there saying, I don't really believe you guys. And if this is such a big problem, why isn't the government doing anything? And
They are.
Talk to me, Ed. What are they doing?
All right, well, John, for the first time, it seems like they are we're getting the help from government, mainly because, unfortunately, most of the money to do these remediations is going to come through lawsuits. But unfortunately, you can't really, the problem is these remediation monies don't necessarily go to something to fix these chemicals, because they are forever chemicals. The half-life, according to John, is at least 50 years, so they don't really break down. So, I mean, you're getting money for remediation, but I just wonder, you know, what exactly are they going to do? So because yes, they can spend that money to get rid of some of the chemicals, but there's so many different ones that right now it's just endless.
All right, so the EPA has proposed regulation to limit the amount of PFAS in water bodies to what, 4.4 parts per trillion or something like that?
It's different amounts for different versions of the PFAS. And just so you understand, like 4 parts per trillion is a grain of salt in 4 Olympic-sized swimming pools.
Yeah.
You know, they've reduced it to essentially you can't discharge any of it without a reporting, notifying the public. And yeah, the EPA has done everything it can. The EPA cannot issue a ban. Only Congress can do that. The EPA has exercised every level of authority it has, largely directed by the PFAS Congressional Task Force formed in 2019, which has brought us to where we are now.
Yeah. All right. So I would imagine that the EPA, if this regulation goes through, that all the water agencies are going to have to start testing their water to see if they meet that standard. And then that just could open up a whole new floodgate of, you know, people realizing that they're getting polluted water.
It did go through.
It did go through. Okay, yeah.
And there's a mandate for all public water facilities, and they're providing money to them to do it, to test their water. But I think it's by the end of next year, they all have to test it, and they have to continue monitoring it. Now, part of the problem with the way they're testing water right now is facilities that release these like when I was talking about earlier, they create batches. One day they may release a lot, they may not release any for 2 or 3 days. So if you only test a water system one day, it may be lower today, far higher tomorrow, and next week be lower again, because the discharges into the natural water source aren't the same every day. They're not consistent.
Yeah. So now, apparent from what I've read in my research, the Environmental Working Group, a nonprofit group, has tested a lot of water bodies all across the country, and they have an extensive map on their website showing all the water bodies that are, you know, high in the PFAS. And I guess the Department of Defense also has done that, because this is apparently a lot of the water bodies located near military sites.
Military sites are often the dischargers of PFAS too.
Yeah.
It's used in any military site that's got an airplane. It's part of foam, and foam is used extensively on military bases for fires, because they have the type of fires where you use foam. But that's not the only way the military uses it. So I think 619 so far contaminated military sites that make the Camp Lejeune issue look small.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And folks, this is not Camp Lejeune, so I know that's water contamination. That's a whole other different animal. But I will, on the show notes, put the links to the Environmental Working Group study, so you can see the map and see if it's, you know, your water body is affected, and same thing with the Department of Defense. All right. So I want to go back to one thing you said, John, which is that despite knowing all the problems that these products are causing, some of them have been phased out, some of them have not. And you basically said that they're waiting to either find an alternate product, or they're hoping that some science can figure out a way to make them unforever or break them down.
Right. Because industries that use they're so beneficial to certain industries. They allowed industries to do things they used to do different ways in a far more efficient, less expensive way. No one in an industry that uses them ubiquitously, no single competitor can stop using them while all their other competitors are still using them. Their costs would go up excessively. They would no longer be competitive. Yeah. So they know they're going to face litigation. They know they're already going to face cases that are already right, and more cases are going to become right because they're going to continue to do it. But they've done the math, and the other alternative is to stop when all the competitors are still using it, and probably go out of business because they're not competitive anymore.
Yeah. All right. So let's get to your white paper.
Think about if you were, let's say you're a cardboard box manufacturer, right? And you decide, I'm going to stop using PFAS to coat it against the water. And all of a sudden, everybody who buys your boxes I'm not going to buy your boxes that aren't waterproof, that aren't water resistant. I mean, why would I do that?
Yeah. We're hooked on PFAS. We're hooked on PFAS.
Or, I mean, it's as simple as that.
Yeah. It's it's a horrible problem. People are, I think, just opening up their eyes to seeing this. So your white paper, and I wanted to preface this by saying that you've basically, it sounds like you're looking for other law firms to coordinate their efforts with you guys. Is that?
Yeah, John can talk a little bit more about the consortium.
Yes, in order to in the average MDL of drug product, we go straight to an MDL. There's a steering committee. There's some organization to it. Outside of the cases that have the states that have state MDLs, a lot of these cases are going to have to proceed as one-offs. Some may be joined under joint rules. So it will require. As I said earlier, this isn't just an elephant, it's a herd of elephants. So you have to pick one and you have to get a team to eat it one bite at a time. Each case cluster will have a different set of defendants. Some defendants will be sued in more than one cluster. But a case cluster basically is you've got a water provider serving a population. Well, that population is that case cluster. And who contaminated the water from the river taken by that water provider are the defendants for that cluster.
It's just, it's crazy. So, all right,
Well, you know what, but maybe it does account for the increase in cancer in this country, right? Or in the world.
It skewed cancer cluster statistics because this has been around for over 50 years. It's in our blood. So, and it's everywhere in the country. So if you look at year to year or look at this town's cancer statistics based on against another town, well, that other town was exposed to for the last 50 years.
Yeah.
So it doesn't pop the way it would with other chemicals that only expose one area. You see a pop in the cancer rate, a particular type of cancer or group of cancers in that area. Here, the whole country was exposed, so it polluted the data. You can't differentiate. You'd be challenged to find an area that isn't or hasn't been exposed in the country.
All right. So what is the point of, what's the purpose of the white paper, and how is this going to help either law firms or people in the industry? And let's go over what it essentially does.
Sure. Well, I think that one, I write 2 or 3 white papers a week, but I think that one is on this subject. But that one is we were talking about. I spent 2 years researching how to identify defendants that contaminated the water that's taken by a specific water provider. What creates a cluster, and so and put together all the evidence to prove that. So there's no way that Ed or even the group of firms that we put together in a consortium can deal with this. So we will do it for other firms. Ed will partner. Ed's partnering with some firms so that if they're interested in this and doing this, and there's in all likelihood literally cases to be filed in their backyard, in probably the town that they practice in, they can contact me or contact Ed, and we can tell them, hey, yes, it is or no, it's not.
This is an area of practice that I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead, John.
No, that's it. I mean, it's creating, because this isn't one mass litigation, it's a massive mass litigation. So if people are interested in it and want to pursue a cluster in their area that's not too large, we can give them what they need to do it.
Right. So they can do the work. They can go to, they can, any attorney can either, co-counsel with regard to the marketing, or they can also, or do the workup and, the discovery. And if in the individual state, there's some type of consolidated docket, then they, I would suggest trying to get on, whatever they call the plaintiff steering committee in that particular state. And I think this is particularly good for young attorneys, because I think this litigation is going to be around for the next 10 to 30 years. And that it's a niche, at least right now, it's a niche practice area that's not that expensive to get into, with very low risk, being that there's over, I think it's 18 billion in settlements to date, and it hasn't even really begun. So, and John has also worked out some financial situations with some funding companies to match any type of investment that a law firm might end up making if they want to join the consortium. So they can also bring cases outside the consortium, because there might be a smaller group of plaintiffs that were affected by a smaller river or smaller water provider, right? So they can act in the consortium, they can act outside the consortium, or both, and we can help them with both the marketing and the management and help with the funding to bring the case. We figure this is about a 3-year timeline. The average case so far has been around $260,000. The average, and these are stats that John could probably help provide. The average cancer case has paid over $1 million that we know of. Obviously, most of these are confidential settlements. But as I keep going back to, I don't think it will be that hard to get a fair compensable amount, being that there are going to be so many defendants, without having forced bankruptcy on anybody.
If an attorney is really interested in this, I've been doing PFAS summits in Fort Lauderdale for the last year. I'm having the third one, the 28th and 29th of June of this month, in Fort Lauderdale. It's a, if you really want to learn, I created videos for the first one. They're truncated videos. And the first one started with just explaining what PFAS was. But now we're getting the third one's getting into how to litigate these cases, how to collect your evidence and identify cases and collect your evidence.
Yeah. So
right at the end, I'll give you my email address. John will give you his, and anybody who wants any information regarding the consortium or just anything regarding PFAS, whether you're a potential client or a potential law firm that wants to, balance the scales and make these things right, you can feel free to reach out.
All right, so let's talk about like the law firm that is, new law firm. They're all hearing about all these mass torts. They want to get in. Maybe they're listening to this and they're saying, wow, 3 to 5 years sounds great. We're just starting up. We got to, figure out how to do things and all that. Is there any way for them to get involved where they can, do the marketing, get the cases, sign them up, and not then be like on their own and like just.
It's actually going to be the other way around, believe it or not. We're going to do the marketing. We're going to provide them with the cases. And we will provide them with mentorship with some of the firms that are already going to get involved. So everybody who's in the consortium will be on the retainer.
Yeah.
So if you're a young firm, I can tell, without giving any names out, I can tell you that to be associated with some of the firms that they would be associated with, probably alone, you couldn't pay for. But yes, there will be mentorship. Everybody's going to be sharing in everybody's fees. So, and depending, as I said, you can do the work, that is, be involved in any of the committees if there are committees assigned. John also has set up something that makes it very easy, and that's it. Once the case is signed up and the injuries are confirmed and exposure is confirmed, we have he has a situation worked out with a nurses consultant firm.
Yeah.
Right. Well, they will go get the medical records. They will review the medical records. They closely relate the medical records to one of the PFAS chemicals, depending upon where they live. And it seems to me that the only type of litigation would be either someone's in complaint and then see what happens if there is a state NDL.
They even arranged to have the individual clients PFAS blood tested wherever they live.
That's right. Part of that will be the blood test too. Just even though we know 98%, there is going to be 1 or 2%, right? Yeah. So we do have to show that they've been exposed, not just where they lived.
Okay, so why we've already discussed that this is not the AFFF firefighters cases.
Different
why
case.
are we focusing on water contamination? Why is that the focus of, and that is the consortium that you're talking about is only water consumption cases?
Well, yeah, that's what the consortium is working on first. In states that have state MDLs, Why water? Because that's where most of the cases are going to come from. I mean, occupational exposure cases, a lot of someone who might have one will also have a water case because their employers who contaminated their water home. But when you deal with occupational exposure injuries, you're dealing with workers' comp exclusivity, which we can overcome in some states, possibly not in others.
Yeah.
When you're dealing with even if it's your employer who contaminated your home water, it's irrelevant that that's your employer. And most of the cases in the country will be from water contamination. Firefighting foam.
You won't find too many. You won't find too many land contamination cases. I don't believe, but there are some, right?
Well, there's a lot of private well, and there are quite a few. 13% of the country gets their water from.
I'm talking about like if you're going to compare it to like the C8 case where you had livestock dying. You know what I mean? That's
Those
a little
cases
bit.
are already going on. There's already litigation going on in Maine over dairy farmers could not sell their milk nor their cows, and they don't want to kill them, so they're continuing to feed them because their cow's milk was contaminated with PFAS because the water their cows were drinking was so contaminated.
Yeah. So let's go back to the whole, 300,000 defendants. I always get like nervous when there's so many defendants. I mean, I know you're like, hey, eliminates the.
No. John was said he just eliminated in one case alone, had to go from 14,000 potential to 1,400. Now that does seem like a huge amount of litigation is what you're probably going to get to. Like, how do you even manage that? Okay, so John, I'm going to put that in you. How do you manage that?
First, there are 300,000 possible, probably more than that, defendants.
Well, let's just talk about your one case where you have 1,400 that you're going to bring.
Yeah.
How do you manage that?
Well, I eliminated small volume users, probable small volume users. I also eliminated companies that were so small it'd be pointless to sue.
I'm not quite saying. I'm saying, how do you handle it now? Once you're going to get 1,400 answers. 1,400 requests for discovery.
Well, when you're suing a river cluster with multiple water providers on a river, there'll be 1,400 total. But in the early stages, where at the top of the river, it'll just be maybe 30 for that first water provider, and then 30 more will be added. At some point, you will lose some of them because they didn't discharge enough for it to go past like 100 miles. So
let's slow down. You understand what he's saying, Greg?
Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to move on to the NPDES permit, what that is and how that helps identify the rotten apple, so to speak.
It's an influence permit. It's part of the Clean Water Act. And if you are going to discharge a hazardous substance or a pollutant into the waters of the United States and now the waters of the state, you have to get one of these permits to do so. And some of them are issued by the state, some of them are issued by the federal government, depends on the state. And what they do is they tell us not only who discharged PFAS, what exact water. Every body of water in this country is identified by a hydrological unit code from the USGC, the Geological Survey. So these records tell us who discharged PFAS and what river it went into.
And how much, right?
Well, no, they do not tell us how much. That they don't do. But we know because of other government research, the industries that use the largest volumes of PFAS. Well, and that will be proven out in discovery, but no, there's no record anywhere that tells us specifically how much this paper mill used. But we know that how the paper mill used it. We know the size of the paper mill, and they literally use thousands of gallons a day.
Got it.
Yeah. Wow. It's an amazing project that you guys are getting into. So, all right, I'm sitting here, I'm thinking to myself, you know what? I need to move into the world of mass torts. I need to get into some good litigation. This sounds really exciting, complicated. Can I
I think it's good for for someone's brand. This is just, a niche area, especially someone younger who wants to make a name of himself. This is, as I said, an area of practice that it's very unique, because normally, if this was a federal case, it'd be like one case in one court and you'd settle it, but it's not going to be like that. Like John says, this is a mass tort of mass torts, so that every state will have a certain number of cases being brought by different law firms, right? Different attorneys, even though it may be in the same cluster. Sort of like, car accident on the same highway. Different lawyers, even though it occurred in the same place, we each have individual cases, right? So we don't know exactly how long this is going to play out, which defendants are going to want to do discovery and which defendants don't. Now, what John does say is, in order for any defendant to subrogate against another defendant, they must first settle with the plaintiff.
Super contribution. It's different than it is in other cases.
Okay.
So that's pretty big.
That's huge. So, all right. But in terms of the lawyer, the law firm that's interested in this, I just want to kind of break it down for them. You call up Ed. Hey, I'm interested in doing it. Let's say these law firms don't have any money. They're just starting up. They got $20 in their, in the bank account or whatever. You mentioned something about litigation funding. You mentioned
it's really matching, so they probably will have to put on some kind of financial. There is some kind of financial contribution that's necessary. If they might be able to fund some of their existing cases. But yes, there is some financial contributions in order to join. In order to join,
this is the route for the young broke lawyer. If he lives in an area where this is where there is a problem, for other firms who don't reside there are going to need help in that area. He can recruit them, or they can recruit him. This is a town hall type litigation. You recruit clients through town halls who you know. So there's a play in this for the young broke lawyer. Yeah,
what we could do is we could help them, with the marketing, and then they can do the most of this litigation on their own if they want, right? We can help them, mentoring them as to the law, and then we can work something out on a co-counsel arrangement, but as not being outside the consortium, so they don't have to pay the membership fees, but they're still able to bring some of these cases, and then maybe join the consortium at a later time. So yes, there is a play there, and if someone's interested in doing that, obviously we don't want to bring 5 or 10 cases. This isn't like someone. I used the word car accident, so maybe that was not a good example. This is still what we consider a mass tort. This is, these are not individual. I don't believe where you're going to have extensive discovery, but maybe you do on the bad injury cases. I can say that. So it might be a good way to defend on a deposition if you don't have some of your own cases right now. But yeah, if they decide, okay, I want to do my own marketing and they want us to help them on the other end, we can absolutely do that. Co-counsel, we can even, if there's lawyers on here who know people who might have gotten sick and just want to refer them, they can do that. Or we can work something out where they do the work, whatever they want.
All right. So I want to kind of break this down for the law firm, the young law firm or new law firm that's starting out. You got a little bit of money. This sounds exciting. You're not sure how to work these kind of cases. All you really need is a little bit of money and talking to Ed and John, and they're going to show you all the parts to getting cases and, however you want to handle the co-counsel on your own in the consortium, all of that. Did I get that right, Ed?
Correct. It could be inside the consortium or outside the consortium. The reason that John put a consortium together is because, like I said, unlike normal mass torts, which is in federal court and usually handled in one district court, these are going to be handled in every single state of the union and in multiple venues, right? If the river is poisoning in a water district in Suffolk County, you're going to file that cancer case in Suffolk County, right? But if that person that water district also covered Nassau County, then you're going to have, you know what I mean? So I think you're going to see a lot of unique circumstances as to who's brought in, who's not brought in. John brought it. Let's say John said that he knocked it down from 14,000 to 1,400. It does not mean that one of those 1,400 is now not going to bring in one of those remaining 14,000 that they think, right? So I think that's going to be, you tell me, John, how litigation-wise, just the courts, how are they going to handle that many defendants How is a Supreme Court judge in upstate New York going to handle a case that has 1,400 answers? And how does a new lawyer who has himself and a partner and 2 paralegals handle that as well?
In New
Even
York,
if it's
they're going
just
to
one
shift it to a
case,
New
you're
York
bringing in
State
1,400
MDL.
defendants. I'm sorry?
In New York, they'll shift it to a New York State MDL. In a state that doesn't have them, the thing about the states that have state MDLs are the more populated states. States that don't have, Montana doesn't need them or never has before. So a lot of those cases will get shifted into MDLs. And the
But if I'm the first one, wait, let me interrupt you. So I'm the first one filing. There is no MDL yet, right? There is no. It's just me. So for a young guy to be starting out and bringing these cases, and all of a sudden now that's something you got to look out for.
But in the smaller clusters, in the really small ones, you might only be naming 20 defendants, and the ones that maybe 50. It's when you get into the clusters of 10 million people that you're naming over 1,000.
And what you were saying is that 10 million people, not those 1,400 are those 1,400 defendants, are you alleging that they've affected all of those?
No.
Or as you're going down the river, like you say, some are dropping off, some are coming up.
Yeah. Because each water provider basically creates its own cluster. A mega cluster is simply when all those water providers got their water from the same river. So you got a collective group of defendants that will not be named in every case. It will be the upriver dischargers from a facility. If you got a water treatment facility here and you've got 30 upstream PFAS dischargers, they will be named by that water facility. You get past that water facility, 20 miles later, there's another one, and there were 5 more defendants discharging between the two. So they will have 5 more. But at some point, the river I'm talking about in particular is over 1,000 miles long. Your fate and transport study will tell you that okay, they discharged a massive amount, but it couldn't have remained a substantive part of the contamination for more than 212 miles. So you stop naming.
Here's what I don't get though. If it can't break down, what does that matter?
Well, it's not just it doesn't break down, but rivers, more tributaries come in. The water volume in the river increases.
It becomes more valuable.
And also, even these substances will adhere to soil. Some of them they don't break down, but they will stay in the river. Leaves go into the soil, so it does diminish. Even something that doesn't break down, floating around in the water will diminish.
Yeah,
it will break down. The fate and transport distance for most chemicals is less than 5 miles.
Yeah, last week a bunch of the farmers are all up in arms because they're seeing that this is happening in their sludge or whatever, and they're getting, they're all up in arms about it, the whole thing. But I think we should end it on this note. What we'll do is we'll come back in about 3 months and we'll talk about it again, how the consortium is evolving and how it's doing. Ed, what's the best way? So there's a law, let's say you're a law firm, you're interested in this, or hey, you got one of these endocrine disrupting cancers, testicular cancer, and you want to talk. What's the best way to get in touch with you guys?
How about my personal email, edlakelaw@yahoo.
I love it. I love that email. All right, guys, that'll do it for this episode. Did I miss anything that's critical that people need to know about?
Nope. I think anything that we do,
we can talk for the next 24 hours and still be things.
I know.
Yeah, exactly. So, John, if you reach out, we have 3 or 4 different white papers, ranging around numbers of potential plaintiffs to what John was just talking about with, the river and how many defendants could you possibly name? And he's always doing research on this. So even if you're not necessarily ready to do anything, we're happy to give you whatever we have.
All right, that'll do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Any questions on these forever chemicals, please? You know how to find me. Go to my YouTube channel. You can leave questions over there, my website, what have you. I'm going to leave Ed's information again in my show notes. Ed, is it all right if I publish one of the white papers?
Absolutely.
All right, we'll do that. And that'll do it, folks.
Thanks again.
All right, take care, everybody.
Thanks a lot.
All right, guys. Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of Cut to the Chase. But before you go, will you open up your podcast app and give us a 5-star review? You can also leave a comment about what you liked most or other topics you'd like us to cover. And please be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any upcoming shows. Thanks, everybody. Be safe out there.